Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special bonus interview episode of Directors Club. I am Jim Laczkowski. First up, I speak with filmmaker Lukas Dhont, a Belgian director, about his new film, Close, which tells the story of a friendship between two boys in their early teens, one of which has to deal with unexpected tragedy. Lukas had a lot of reasons to tell this personal story, which he shares candidly.
As a young queer boy, at a certain point in puberty, I felt that the intimacy I shared with other boys was looked at through the lens of sexuality, and I started to fear it.
Later on, guest co-host Bill Ackerman talks with acclaimed French filmmaker Mia Hansen-Løve about her latest film, One Fine Morning, another story about grappling with change, but while dealing with an aging parent and learning to fall in love again.
What helps us cope with the difficulties and the tragedies of life and the cruelty of life is the fact that life keeps moving on and that it's always a movement.
All of this and more coming up on Directors Club. After winning no less than 4 awards at Cannes in 2018 with his debut feature Curl, the Belgian director Lukas Dhont comes back this year with Close, a story of friendship between two 13-year-old boys, which is primed to be nominated for Best International Feature, and it's a film that won the Grand Prix at Cannes this past May. It's an intimate story about Leo and Remy, who are closer than close, with a connection that slowly turns sour once they're bullied by homophobic classmates. It then becomes more about how someone that is young and still learning about who they are can continuously struggle with internal feelings and external forces out of their control. It's sad, perceptive, and compassionate, portraying a different kind of friendship that we rarely see in film. And Lukas was kind enough to take some time out of his busy schedule to talk with me about Close, which you are about to hear. And I'm very grateful to have talked with him about this special story that I encourage you all to seek out. It opens on February 3rd at the Music Box Theater here in Chicago. Now here is my conversation with Lukas Dhont.
Be not so nervous, be not so frail. Someone watches you, you will not fail. Be not so nervous, be not so frail. Be not so nervous.
Hi.
How we doing today, Lukas? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. I'm really thrilled to talk to you about Close today, and this definitely feels like a film that is close to you personally, but I read that, the starting point was coming across a particular psychological study and a book. So talk a bit about why you decided that this story of intimate friendship was the one you wanted to share with the world.
Yeah, it's true that I think, there was this starting point for me. I was putting a word on paper called and the word was masculinity, because I knew that I wanted to make something about that. I just didn't really know in what form, and there was this realization that for the longest time we had been focusing with the lens, with the camera, on the battlefields, on men fighting with each other, and not so much on, I guess, men holding on to each other. And so there was this realization, and there was a friend of mine who recommended me a book called Deep Secrets, which is an American studies done by a psychologist called Nio Bue. And she interviewed 150 boys, and she followed them. She stayed in their lives over the course of 5 years. And at the age of 13, she asks them to talk about their male friendships. And at that age, they talk about each other in the most loving, tender way. They say they would go crazy without each other. And there's an enormous beauty to it. That's incredibly tender. But as these boys grow older, as they go through puberty, and as this woman asks them the same questions again, we just witness how these boys distance themselves from that language of the heart, and how they actually start to become much more performative and stop to dare to express that love. And so I think I strongly, deeply connected to these boys, because there was also that moment in time, and the same moment in time, when I started to fear intimacy within my friendships. I started to push away and be pushed away. And I think for the longest time, I had the feeling that I was the only one going through that experience, because when we're young, we so often think like that.
Sure.
But what these boys showed me, what they gave me, is this sense of collectiveness, this sense of connectedness, actually. Because I realized that through them, that we live in this society that learns men from early on that authentic connection is not something valued within their vocabulary, within their worlds. We learn them that being a man is about independence, competitiveness, that this society validates everything which is hard and smothers the things that are soft. But I realized that what I had always seen as, or what I tried to hide, like all these other young men, this emotion, and I had seen it as a weakness for the longest time, that it was actually, my superpower. And so I wanted to make a film about, on the one hand, a beautiful and tender, loving friendship that we so rarely get to see on a screen, but also show what happens when this society, this world, murders that beautiful friendship.
Yeah, and I really like what you had to say about it being a superpower, because we don't think of vulnerability in that way. But when you're at an impressionable age during that time, you're still craving some sort of connection, whether it's physical or not, and young men struggle with expressing emotion and fragility because, like you said, they're almost raised to think it will make them look weaker, which is really unfortunate. And I'm glad that your film doesn't sort of reinforce any sort of masculine stereotypes. In fact, the two boys meet on the flower field, and it's kind of this beautiful and tender relationship we get to bear witness to. Talk about how you discovered these young actors and how they were able to just establish this strong sense of sensual friendship between the two of them.
Yeah, I love that you use the word sensual, because it was an important word for us. Well, I think for the longest time we were writing, and I think that was safe because we didn't confront ourselves with the fact that we would have to find two 13-year-olds who could actually play these parts. I think we avoided thinking about that for a while, but then as the moment approached and as we realized that we would have to find two boys, maybe in the beginning I was like, ooh, this is going to be a challenge, but then it also really excited me because we had this possibility of finding new talent, and I went to scout in all the schools in and around Brussels to find, young talents, and met many young people that way. But something very particular happened as I was taking a train from Antwerp to Ghent. I was listening to music, Max Richter, so everything becomes a little bit of cinema when you listen to him.
He's one of my favorites, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I look next to me and I see this young man be very expressive, just talking to his friends, being really like, I don't hear what he says, but I see his expression. And I thought, wow, this is someone really special. And I also thought, I'm going to regret if I don't go up to him and ask him if he wants to do a casting for cinema, which he did. And Our casting process was quite elaborate in the sense that with young people, I feel like seeing them only for 20 minutes is something that doesn't really work. I feel you need to see them for a longer moment in time. And so we organized full days in which we did workshops with these boys. And we would always invite them in groups of 20. And in one of these groups, Aiden and Gustav came together. They had never met each other before. They had never acted before. But there was this chemistry between them from that was like immediate. Like there was something between them that's just only explainable because it's him, because it's the other. This chemistry that you cannot fake. And they kept on surprising us. And we rehearsed with them for 6 months, really trying to build intimacy, confidence, and family. And I think they really give these beautiful performances in this film.
Oh, absolutely. And very relatable. And I think your approach and point of view is often very observational too. And it's kind of building around all these feelings. How do you make decisions as to which shots will convey a specific feeling for the audience to engage with? Because I know there's long shots, there's medium shots. I mean, there's all a variety. And I'm just curious, like, how do you make those decisions, when you're working with your cinematographer?
Yeah, I think, it's a piece from the heart for the heart. And so I really try to give that as a space in this film. I also have to say that I'm someone who didn't want to be a filmmaker at first. I wanted to be a dancer. I never followed that journey, but I did, that I did become a filmmaker, and that passion, that desire for dance stayed with me. So when I write, I very much write movement, I write looks, I very much write like a choreographer. So when I work with the cinematographer on the script, which is very much based on movement and tonality and choreography, we first look at why there are these intentions of the body, the power of the look also, because there's a lot of looks, and the way that we look at the world and the way the world looks at us takes a very prominent place in this piece. And so then we look at a lot of painters. We look at a lot of paintings like Henry Scott Hugh, Hockney, Bacon. We're inspired by the use of color, by the use of light. And we will start to talk scene by scene what we wanted to convey and how we wanted to feel, maybe more than what we wanted to mean. The meaning, I feel, is worked in the script and is worked on all the layers that are underneath. For example, there's the metaphor of the flowers, there's the metaphor of the hockey, and of course in the beginning I will translate all that, but then it's what do we want the scene, how do we want the scene to come across, how do we want to feel? And I think this is a piece that is very much about the internal mechanisms, about implosion rather than explosion. And so we invite the camera often to get very close to the character in order to make you feel like you can look into them, like you are as much with them as you are looking at them. And that is a work of contrast. That is a work of, fast running in between flowers to a shot of two boys laying as close as possible together in a bed. And, this stillness of that. And so I feel like it's about finding contrast and finding images that have meaning. I immediately, when I say that, have to think of this long zoom out shots. After 15 minutes of the film, 15 minutes where you have been in their bubble, constantly close to them. And then all of a sudden, as they arrive on that playground, that first place where we get confronted with society and all its divisions and all its, groups with codes and norms of behavior, the camera zooms out, leaves the two of them, and goes and this lets them disappear in a group, and it's that type of movement, it's that type of camera that I think is really translating something that should be felt.
Yes, exactly. I felt that way about that shot in particular as well. And I feel the whole story is presented with such delicacy and in a very candid and balanced manner. But yeah, the contrast you mentioned is also there. What do you hope when what the audience walks out with? What do you hope that they feel after they see this story play out?
Well, I think it's a film that confronts us with regret. A regret is a feeling that we have all felt so strongly, that often we carry with us through life, as we move through life. And so I feel like it's a sort of confrontation with the wounds that we maybe carry with us from childhood or from being young. And I do strongly believe in the sense of collective catharsis. I'm not Greek, but I feel Greek in the sense that I believe in the same way in the power of catharsis. And then I also feel like it's an ode to the power, but also to the fragility of our connections. I think we live in a world that often separates us. And I feel like it is a sort of ode to the connections in our life.
I couldn't agree more. And congratulations on the film, Lukas. I really hope it leads to even more success in the future. And I'm really looking forward to what comes next for you. Thank you so much for your time and this film.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Bill Ackerman, guest co-host on this episode, and coming up next is an interview I did with the writer-director Mia Hansen-Løve, one of my favorite filmmakers working today, so this was a pretty exciting opportunity for me. We spoke about her most recent film, One Fine Morning, which is being distributed in the U.S. by Sony Pictures Classics. It's opening in New York and Los Angeles on January 27th and then expanding into other cities. And this is Mia Hansen-Løve's eighth feature. It's a return to the Parisian settings of her earlier films like Goodbye First Love and Things to Come, and it stars Léa Seydoux as a widowed single mother who's raising a daughter while working as a translator. And it's a story about two developments happening in her life, told more or less in parallel. It's about her experience caring for her father, played by Pascal Gregory, who has a degenerative disease. He's rapidly losing his sight and his memories. He's growing increasingly helpless and frightened. And it's also about a romance that develops with an old friend, played by Melville Poupeau. 2022 saw the release of many fiction films that drew upon the autobiographies of their writer-directors for inspiration, whether it's Steven Spielberg and The Fabelmans, Elegance Bratton's The Inspection, James Gray's Armageddon Time, Richard Linklater's Apollo 10.5, even Charlotte Wells' Aftersun. And Mia Hansen-Løve has always acknowledged the real-life inspirations for her stories, whether it's an uncle in the case of All Is Forgiven, her late mentor, the producer Humbert Balsan, with Father of My Children, her brother Sven Hansen-Løve and Eden, her mother in Things to Come. Of course, Goodbye First Love and Bergman Island draw elements from her own life, and that's also the case with One Fine Morning. In dealing with a story centering in part on her own father, she filmed in hospitals where he had stayed, stocked the shelves of Pascal Gregory's character's library with her father's own books. It even included some of her father's poignant original writing, where he articulates his own experience with the disease. But this isn't a film like Michael Haneke's Amour or Gaspar Noé's recent film Vortex. It isn't unrelentingly somber or austere. This is a film with warmth to it. It has humor and some recurring jokes that I won't spoil. It has sex scenes that are cheerfully lusty. The characters aren't always perfect people, but like a lot of Mia Hansen-Løve's films, there aren't really villains in the story. Now, if you're a listener to a show like Directors Club, you're encouraged to look for connections within a filmmaker's body of work, recurring themes, recurring imagery. And if you're familiar with any of Mia Hansen-Løve's earlier films, all of which Gianna D'Amelio and I discussed in depth on episode 204 of this show, One Fine Morning fits comfortably alongside the very best of her deeply personal cinematic work. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. Special thanks to Jessica Hazan at Hook Publicity for setting this up. And here's my talk with Mia Hansen-Løve. Hi, Mia. Welcome to the show. I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I will have a few questions for you. One Fine Morning follows two films of yours that were more transnational, Maya and Bergman Island. You're working in different countries using English dialogue. One Fine Morning is a return to Paris, and you had said that this was a story that you didn't necessarily want to tell it, but you needed to tell it, and that you couldn't wait too long to tell it. I was wondering, could you tell me what it felt like to return to Paris as a location and why there was such urgency to tell this story now?
Well, how it felt, I would love to say that it felt great to be back home. But actually, to be honest, even though I was happy to be able to film in my hometown and, not be away for so long, having two kids, for that reason, especially, it was a relief for me to have been inspired to write a film that took place close to my home, or at least, in my town. But on the other hand, when I was filming One Fine Morning, we were still in the middle of this awful COVID time, and most of the film, or at least a lot of scenes in the film, were taking place in the hospitals. So I have to say that the contrast between the memory of the magical forêt of Bergman Island, that island that I filmed, that's reserved and peaceful place, and the disease and the tension that you that you experience when you shoot in Paris, especially in this time, the contrast was pretty strong. So it was fine, and I had to do it anyway. So regrets. It was like as it was. But I would lie if I would say that it was just like so nice to be back in Paris. It was like, okay, back to reality, And why I did it? Well, I made this experience of seeing my father disappearing in a disease that was consuming, destroying, both his physical and intellectual capacities. This was a very painful process, and at some point, I realized that I wasn't able to move on, write something until I was going to. I had to face this experience. I didn't know how to write anything else without trying to make something out of this experience. And it wasn't the only thing, actually, because there was also an experience of happiness, and the two happening at the same time, and how interesting that was, and how special it was to be going through grief and love at the same time, sadness and happiness and joy, And I was interested in trying to capture in a cinematographic form that moment. But again, just as you said, it was more a necessity than a choice.
Okay. Well, I know that
I think all of your films pretty much draw inspiration from your personal life, whether or not you would say that they're literally autobiographical. And this story, it's two parallel situations that the character is dealing with, both the caring for her father, but also this new romance that's coming up with an old friend. When you set out to write a film like this, are both of those pieces already in place, or do you start with one place and then combine the two elements? And do you write purely from your own memory, or do you discuss the past with friends or family that might have remembered this time of your life that you're drawing from?
It's very. I think it's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking this. I mean, about if I discuss it with friends, discuss my memories. Actually, yes. I wouldn't say with friends, but I certainly discuss the kind of memories that were involved in that story. I discussed them with my mother a lot, especially since there was a lot in the film that had to do with the tough experience of the hospitals. When you see, I saw my father going from one place to another, and we struggled to find the right place for him. But this experience was so emotional that I had forgotten a lot of the practical thing, and I would. I think I'm sure I did ask a lot about it to my mother, who probably remembered the concrete things better than I do. No, but I think the two things. I mean, the romance and the question of the relationship to a sick father. They were together. They worked together from the very start. It was never the one thing like the father and daughter story, and then something more, and then that the romance would come later. No, actually, I think the moment where I had the idea for the film, I don't know if you can really define a moment, because it's probably a long unconscious process, but sometimes there is a moment where you become aware, of the existence of a possible film. And or at least for me, there is usually like a specific moment where there is an image or a scene that is like gives me the impulse, to start writing a film. And I think in the case of that film, it really started with the last scene of the film. It's a scene where I don't want to spoil the film, but I'm not sure it's going to spoil anything. But it's a scene where all comes together, the romance and the grief, and it's a scene that is both sad and happy. Mm-hmm. But it's the only and it's a scene where the main character visits her father, and she gets very emotional, but then she walks out, and it's in the summer, and ultimately it's also a scene about happiness. And I actually made an experience that was very close to that scene in that same hospital where I filmed later, in the exact same place. And I think for me, writing the film was a way of kind of unfolding all the emotions that were contained, in that afternoon that I went through. There was a lot of things there for me. And I think after that afternoon, in the summer where I was there with my daughter, and I met, it was maybe one of the last times that I saw my father. But after that, I knew there was a film that I wanted to do, and actually writing the film would be like finding the right path to that moment.
It's interesting you mentioned the hospital location, because I have a real big interest in visiting old film locations. And I always love hearing you talk about how locations can inspire your films. The idea, I think you tackle it pretty much directly in Bergman Island. But I think that with One Fine Morning, I know that, like you had mentioned, the hospitals that your father had stayed in were a location. When you're writing a film that draws from your own memories, and I'm thinking of also things like Goodbye First Love or Eden, do you revisit the places from your past to soak up the inspiration when you're writing, or is it just someplace that maybe you'll shoot there if it's possible?
Locations play such an important role for my inspiration. Actually, sometimes it's almost giving me the impulse, or it's at the very start of a project, of a film. are inspiring, where I have a past in those places. For some reasons, when I love those places, when sometimes there are places I've not been to, but I feel attracted to, or sometimes there are places I've known forever and I want to go back there, maybe for the last time. But I think it's the reason why I could never shoot a film in a studio, because I'm inspired by how the light evolves in a place, like where it comes from, whether it be a house or an open space. But the question of natural light is so important in my relationship to those places that I could never imagine filming in the studio. But the second reason is because I love places that have a history. Yeah. And when I decided to go to Foreux to write that film, Bergman Island, I went there to write even before really knowing what the film was going to be about. I mean, I had an idea. It was going to be, there would be a couple of directors, Bergman, inspiration, and I had some themes that I knew the film was going to be about. But really the storyline was not the first thing. The first thing was the location. And in the case of One Fine Morning, I wouldn't say it's the same, because there were some feelings, of course, involved from the start. Well, in Bergman Island too, actually, everything is so organically mixed, But so there were feelings. There was love for a father, love for a man, and but the rhythm was given to me at first by the idea of this character who would move from one place to another, from her home to the place where she works, but also from her home to the different hospitals where her father would go to. And then, yes, I love mentioning the names of the places in my film. It's something I was always very sensitive to. I'm sensitive to it also as a reader of books or a spectator of cinema, And it's one of the films I enjoyed about Romer, for instance, is the way Eric Romer, the way he used to film places and also use their names as use the poetry of the names of the geography, the geography as something poetic, how you film the city, how you film a district, and how you tell the viewers where you are. And it's something I really love. And in general, I like the films to be very specific. I always believe that you could be, the more specific you were, the more universal you could be. Whereas so many people think the opposite. So many people think you should not know where you are, who they are. It should be very timeless. And I believe the opposite.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when I think about your characters, I think vocation is always such an important part of their stories. And many of your happiest characters are the ones that can express something of themselves through their work, whether it's architecture or music or filmmaking, even war reporting maybe. But like, I'm thinking about Sandra in this film and how she's a translator and she uses her abilities to help others express themselves, even their old memories. I'm thinking of the war veterans at the beginning. Like, it feels like an extension of her sacrificing of herself, her time for other people. And I've seen you with translators at film festivals. I know that you've come across a few in your life, but I mean, what was it that inspired you to make this character that is at the center of the story a translator? Was that something that you had thought of for a long time as just an idea?
I think just exactly as you just said, it felt like an extension of the rest of her, like who she is and the rest of her life. She restrained, she helps other people. Especially her father. I mean, she helps her father find his word. He's losing the language. He cannot really express himself anymore. And she helps him a lot she helps him. I mean, she tries to help him how she can, to find the words. Mm-hmm. She spends a lot of time with her daughter. And even in her passionate relationship, she's also, at first, at least for a long time, she's very discreet in a way. She embraces that story and that romance, but she doesn't express a lot like what she thinks. She's very, like, she's shy, you could say, in a way. And to me, the translator is the interpreter. He's in this dark room. People don't see him use his words to understand better the words of others, but they don't. They are kind of transparent, and I think it worked well with the idea that I had for that character, who was a very discreet, restrained, and shy woman, but who will rediscover herself and find a real place for happiness in her life in that love story that will happen to her. And that's the whole process of the film. But at first, she's very discreet, yes. And I was interested in filming Léa Seydoux in such a character, which is so unusual for her. And the last reason about why I made her into a translator, just as you said, all my characters have vocations in my film. I can't help always choosing jobs for them that are more than jobs, that are jobs that actually they have a real love for. And I'm sure it has to do with the fact that my films are so personal, and as a director, I'm also very passionate about filmmaking. And because of that, I always want my characters to also have their own. It's very difficult, actually, for me to not let them have a vocation, even though I would actually love to be able one day to make a film where, somebody would just have a very not interesting and boring job. But so far, I always wanted them to have a job that I would also want to do. And my father has been a translator. And so I was always interested in that, in translating. I find it very beautiful, this idea of translating. And so that's also one more reason, of course.
I was curious. I always love the use of music in your films. And some of the most heartbreaking moments in One Fine Morning involve music triggering memories or emotions that are too painful for the characters. When you write, do you write to music? Do you know that, say, the music from Jan Johansson or even Robin Williamson in Bergman Island, do you know that the music that sets the mood, do you already have that at the writing stage, or is that something that you find more as the film has already been shot and you're playing around with it? How soon does the music part of your films come into the picture?
Most of the time it's there from the start, actually. Yes, there is not so much music in my films, because I don't work with film music composers. I've never had, and made 8 films, and I never had a composer write music for the film. I was always using existent songs. I think it's the same reason why I told you I love locations that have a story. I love songs that have a story that is another story. That I love songs that have their own past and their own life, and I like to put that in my film, and have something else connect with my own world. But yes, most of the time when I write, I already have in mind, if not all the songs of the film, the most important one, and it helps me finding the mood, it's just like, when you find a title, for instance, when I love to have the title from the start, of a film, because it gives you direction too. And it's the same for me with the music, I think you don't write a scene the same way if you know that it's going to be Schubert played in the scene, or if it's going to be Mozart, or if it's going to be rock and roll. It's not the same thing at all. So knowing what's going to be there, and how much, and the music affects me a lot, so it actually influences my writing a lot, I guess. So yeah, I do know the music in advance.
Okay. Now, as a viewer myself, I do enjoy melodrama. Like, I love Douglas Sirk and Pedro Almodovar and things that are very manipulative. When I think about your films, I think that you're dealing with subject matter that I could associate with melodrama, like addiction or suicide or romantic anguish, loss of a loved one. But the way that you handle this kind of material, you're always quick to temper the darkness with either humor or whimsy or some kind of thing that keeps it from being too negative or too heavy. I'm thinking of Gregoire's daughters and Father of My Children playing in his office with the phone, or I'm thinking of Natalie breaking into laughter when she sees her husband and she's been weeping and she breaks into laughter. Or even in Eden, when things are going bad for Paul, we still feel the joy of the music that it's bringing to other people. Like, it's not all bad, even when things are heavy. And I know that One Fine Morning is the same way in that you are kind of juggling these tones between something that's very heavy and something that's very kind of warm and light. Is that a tricky balance for you as far as juggling the tones, that it never feels like tonally weird to me how you can keep it from being like when humor or lightness is introduced, it never feels wrong. It always feels like this is just how the world is. And I know that that's part of your philosophy, that you can kind of talk about it in Bergman Island a little bit, like it's not all darkness. But is that a hard thing for you to pull off?
I think it really results of my experience of life. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do laugh even on funerals, and it helps. I'm not trying to be optimistic. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. But I'm trying to make films that really reflects films which are truthful to my experience of life, or to my I don't know if I'm allowed to say to my vision of life, but at least to my experience, how I see it. And I think what helps us cope with the difficulties and the tragedies of life and the cruelty of life is the fact that life keeps moving on, and that it's always a movement. And thanks to that, it never stops on the tragic, on the tragic moment. There is always more after, something else after that, and sometimes it makes it actually us angry when we are very, very sad, and we would almost like to stay with our sadness forever, but we have to accept that life continues. I remember when the producer of my first feature, Humbert Balzan, committed suicide, and that inspired me, my second feature, Father of My Children. But I remember when he died, I was in shock for some days, and at the time I was writing for Les Cahiers du Cinéma a bit, but I struggled to write. But I remember the chief redacteur of the paper asked me to write something about a film, and I said, "Are you crazy? I can't write. I'm so sad. I can't do anything." And he became very authoritarian, and he said, "I don't care. You have to write, and you just do it. I give you 2 days, and in 2 days you have to write this." And he also loved actually Humbert Balzan and had known him, but it made me very angry at the time that he forced me to work, when I just wanted to sit and cry. And I realized later that it had really helped me, that I had to, sit and focus on something else. And I think my film reflects that in a way, that even though we would want to be sad forever in some times, because it's a way of remembering the people we lose, to stay with our sadness. There is a cruelty about life that is actually something beautiful, and that is that we have to accept to live on and make other experiences and have other joys, And I think my films just try to reflect that.
Yeah. Well, you made a great film. I love all of your films, and so I thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm getting the sign that I have to let you go, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much. I hope my English will be okay for you.
Oh, it's great. No, it's better than my French.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Will remain when prophecies have passed away.